All right, we're moving on. What are we moving on to? It is so hard. It's massively depressing, and they get to just keep failing up, destroying up, genocide. Oh, Israel, yeah, of course. We'll see that. That was a perfect segue.
Something fun to talk about here.
Yeah. Well, so last week, Israel defied Biden's red line. They invaded Rafah, and Biden was really upset and said he was going to put a hold on some of the weapons because he was so upset.
But he also didn't have a red line. So you got competing messages. His red line was if there were serious attacks on Rafah, it morphed into that.
Right.
And because these by all observers, this is not a serious attack. This is just some little stuff where they're stopping all humanitarian aid and dropping 2,000-pound bombs.
Tents.
Yeah, but it's not a serious attack, so it's not really crossing the red line. But now it is, maybe-ish.
Okay, so he says he's going to withhold some weapons or put a hold on some weapons. Right away, we get an article. Despite the pause, the Israeli military has enough weapons supplied by the U.S. and other partners to conduct the Rafah operation, what a sanitized word, if it chooses to cast aside U.S. objections, the first official said. Okay, so not only was that completely revealed to be a totally empty threat, but then the what is he, the foreign minister? What is Ben-Gvir? What's his title in the Israeli?
You're asking too much of me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Itamar Ben-Gvir right away puts out a tweet last week saying Hamas loves Biden. You cannot have one morsel of criticism. You can't even pretend to withhold arms when you've already given billions of dollars worth of arms to help slaughter over 40,000 people.
They have the same hold on our government as Trump does on the Republican Party. And they come at you harder than Trump does if you are mildly critical of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, iconoclast, Minister of Security.
I knew that. I was going to say it. No, I forgot. Completely forget. But Biden has had it. He's had it. No more patience with Israel. It may be wearing thin as Rafah gets destroyed and humanitarian aid is blocked.
Look at how USA Today phrases it, as Rafah questions linger. And I mean, okay, two things on this. How does he admit that he knows that American bombs have killed civilians? Because that's not supposed to happen. That's against the law in our country. We're not supposed to be giving weapons when we know it's committing war crimes or killing civilians, right? Even though I know we all know it, but like the fact that he said that out loud. But the other part of it is, why do they keep leaking these? He's really lost patience. He's having tough conversations, but because it just makes him look so feeble. Like he's already having to combat the very clear impression that he's this doddering old senile man who has no control over anything. But then they keep doing this. It just makes him look so pathetic and weak against this bombastic asshole Trump, who always comes off as a strongman. I mean, obviously I can't stand them both, but like, why is the White House leaking these sorts of stories to the press?
Because for the normie Dem, they want to believe this myth that he has a good heart and he's struggling. So that gives him permission to say, even at the end of this, we think he was wrong on all of it. He struggled through it, and he's better than Trump.
Yeah.
Think what Trump would do. Trump would have just bombed them all. He would have nuked them all. But meanwhile, you got Lindsey Graham out there saying we can nuke all of Palestine. And where are the Democrats coming out and saying, holy shit, this guy should be
censoring
him out. What the hell?
Nothing. They do that to Rashida Tlaib for saying free Palestine or wearing a keffiyeh or whatever the hell. And they don't say anything about Lindsey Graham. And with Biden saying he might withhold weapons, and then of course just gives them another $1 billion in weapons today or yesterday, right? Like in the middle of this, when all of these reports are coming out of, his lawyers are worried. The US State Department has finally revealed, one huge report on all of the war crimes and civilian casualties.
Yeah.
Right.
All the war crimes, but not genocide somehow. That's weird. That's weird.
Yeah. So what was I saying? No idea. Anyway, maybe we should show a video. No,
yeah,
go ahead.
Let's show it. What do you got? What do you got?
No. But so, okay, wait. So wait, we did have a thing blaming Hamas. Oh, well, which way are we going? Do you want to talk about the genocide? Do you want to talk about the numbers? Which way are we going?
I mean, he's all over the place. So this is 4 days ago. A ceasefire is possible tomorrow if Hamas frees Israeli detainees. Well, that was part of the freaking offer that they took that offer.
They took the offer. And there have been multiple reports. I mean, okay, that was from the 11th. That was from May 11th. A full week before that, we got reports. I mean, everybody knew that Hamas said, we will take the offer. We will release the hostages if there is a permanent ceasefire. And Netanyahu made it very clear, no matter what happens, whether there's a deal or not, we will only have a very short ceasefire. It will not be permanent. We are definitely invading Rafah. So, and by the way, Hamas from the very beginning said that they would release the hostages if there was a ceasefire. In October, they said that. This has never been about Israel getting back their hostages. We know that all the hostages who have been released, well, first of all, Israel's killed more hostages than it's released, number one. Number two, the hostages who have been released have spoken up to the point where now they're banned really from speaking to journalists, but spoken up to say what they were really concerned about was Israel's indiscriminate bombing. They were, not eating a lot, but they said that they were getting the same portions as their captors. Listen, I'm not saying I'm not trying to extol the virtues of Hamas, and nobody should be held hostage who's a civilian. All of this is awful, right? But there is no way anybody in Israel, and I don't know why people in the US could possibly believe that what Israel wants to do is save the hostages. And so when they say, oh, if you just release the hostages, they have offered. They've said they will, but they want a ceasefire.
Well, I'm thinking back to the time they did release, I think, 3 hostages. Well, the hostages themselves came out waving the flags and got shot by the Israeli snipers.
Yep.
So,
well, those escaped. Those 3 escaped.
Yeah. But
hands up, speaking Hebrew, naked, I think definitely from the waist up, maybe only wearing underwear, but hands up, waving flags, speaking Hebrew, and were shot and killed.
And why would they do that? Because they know they know the reality of their own. They were IDF. They know what happens. We better try our best here to be clear as all day.
Yeah.
But the real panic now, I mean, so you got humanitarian aid not getting in. You've got the doctors, U.S. and aid doctors around the world are stuck in the hospital. They normally shift out every few weeks. I don't know what the rotation is. But they can't get out, but they'll let them out. They'll make some deal. But what all these doctors, they always, first off, when these doctors leave their shifts, they get interviewed about Hamas. They get interviewed about, did you see anybody? Was there any unsorted thing? And not a single report has come out of anybody who's ever served in all these places that they bomb and say this was a Hamas safe haven has ever reported any Hamas.
Oh, the surgeon was actually a Hamas general. Yeah, never.
Right. It's never happened. So what they're worried about is these doctors that are there are worried that when they leave, if they leave and aren't replaced immediately, it will be declared some Hamas thing, and the last freaking chance of any hospital care, medical care will be gone.
Right.
And we're on the verge of that happening right now.
I mean, it kind of is, because when they closed off the Rafah port, or the entrance, there are 20 American doctors who are basically stranded there. They've been there, I think, for 10 days. Ryan Grimm and I don't know who else at The Intercept did a report and interviewed one of the nurses there, Monica Johnson. But they are already on the verge of their own starvation after 10 days. Some of them are hooked up to IVs after 10 days. They are seeing, they say, injuries that they have not seen and these are people who, they're humanitarian doctors. They are always going to they're, places that are in the middle of conflicts and war. They have never seen the sheer numbers and also the complete devastation that's happening there. People, children who have survivable injuries are dying of famine. They don't have enough colostomy bags or sanitation devices. So people who are being shredded by shrapnel and bombs have their insides coming out of them, which means the waste from inside of them is also, I'm going to use a really medical term, like dirtying, because I can't think of a good word, but infecting, like putting, is making the whole area unsafe. They're dying from preventable infections, and they're children. They're burned all over their bodies. There's just and they're having to decide, they're using medical terms that they say that they remember learning, like, making those evaluations, like which lives are worth saving, but in a way that they've never had to confront before. Because people, if we use oxygen for this person who's absolutely salvageable, we could be using it for 3 smaller people. So we're going to let this 50-year-old die so we can try to save these 9-year-old children. Like, they're having to make horrific choices.
No, I was listening to, I know I get a lot of shit for it, but I listen to NPR. In part because there is some truth that gets through on that show, but in part also to understand the narrative being told to normal Dems. But even NPR had a really good segment on this, and they were interviewing the doctors and one of the people in charge of one of the programs supplying aid. And the doctor was saying, and this really hit me and it was gross, but it's just like, so many people come in, have maggots coming out of all their wounds, like maggots from all their wounds, because they don't have anything to kill this. It's the disease and infection. And they were also talking about, like, look, somebody has an amputation, you stop the initial surgery,
right?
But most often these people need a post-treatment, a second surgery, and that's just not an option for any of these people. So they're not providing any kind of medical care that they would provide somebody. It's all just battlefront, quick fix, get out of here. The next guy's going to die if we don't treat them right now.
Yeah, it's awful, but at least we have a State Department that's really on top of things and we've brought empathy back to the White House. This is Jake Sullivan being questioned by a reporter, Kimberly Halkett, I think.
You said at the start of this that you don't believe what's happening in Gaza is genocide. What criterion are you using?
We're using the internationally accepted term for genocide, which includes a focus on intent. And it's not just me standing here at this podium. In the context of this International Court of Justice case at The Hague, the United States actually made a presentation backed up by legal analysis, which I would invite you to read because it lays out all of those criteria.
Francesca Albanese, the Special UN Rapporteur on Human Rights in Palestine, presented one in March. She presented it in Geneva. The 3 criterion she used, citing international law, 3 acts: Israel's intent to destroy national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups, serious bodily or mental harm to a group, inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring physical destruction in whole or in part, within imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, process of erasure of the native Palestinians. So those 3 things are happening. How can you say genocide's not being committed?
As I just told you, I think the best way for me to answer that question is actually to ask you to look at the laydown that we gave. Which
are you saying this isn't happening?
I'm sorry. I thought you asked me how I can say it. I'm saying I'd like you to look at the United States'.
I just did. I'm asking you saying this isn't happening.
Do you mind if I finish answering your question before you interrupt?
Are you saying that she's a liar?
The United States has laid down at the International Court of Justice in writing, in detail, its position on this issue, and I'd ask you to read it. Thank you.
Are you saying that it doesn't line up for them with what she's saying? Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, Jake. Great. That's so great. Thanks, Jake.
I mean, that's skirting the question so hard because you're asking people to read a legal brief.
Yeah.
And it's not sensational. It's not, there's nothing in there. I mean, and she read some of it back to him, basically.
Yeah.
But that's not your point. Your point as this spokesperson for the Pentagon is to come out and use clear speak language to explain the situation.
And I'll say, I'd advise you to go look
at
at
the legal
something.
brief.
Yeah. And also, we've all seen, like, we know what their case is. They're saying it's not a genocide. And, 127 other countries are all starting to come forward and say, we need a ceasefire. And the case that South Africa made, laying out the case for a genocide, has been deemed plausible, which, I think they have to change some of their wording because it's a little too squishy, and it allows people to misinterpret intentionally what's actually happening. But we know that Biden's actual lawyers are worried. We know that the State Department has many detailed reports on the war crimes that are being committed, right? The State Department details numerous possible humanitarian law violations by Israel in its war on Gaza, and yet it suggests no changes in policy or consequences. Current and former State Department officials can't believe it. I mean, we know that there was the resignation of a U.S. Army Major, Harris Mann. So he resigned a few days ago. Protest of unqualified, here come the readers, unqualified U.S. support to Israel. While assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency, Major Harrison Mann said he was enabling policies that violated his conscience. As the death toll in Gaza has risen, the Biden administration has faced waves of internal dissent for supporting Israel in the war. At some point, this is U.S. Army Major Harrison Mann, sorry. Whatever the justification, you're either advancing a policy that enables the mass starvation of children or you're not. I know that I did, in my small way, wittingly advance that policy. And I want to clarify that as the descendant of European Jews, I was raised in a particularly unforgiving moral environment when it came to the topic of bearing responsibility for ethnic cleansing. Which, same. I mean, a lot of Jews who were raised by people who have a direct knowledge of the Holocaust feel very strongly that never again means for anybody, not just for Jews. And they do not want to be part of this. And then today, and I don't know if I ended up pulling it right before, but I think I did, the first Jewish Biden administration appointee, Jewish staffer, resigns from Biden administration, cites her Jewish heritage in accusing Biden of disastrous support for Israel's military campaign. Lily Greenberg Call, who promptly was then banned from Twitter right after that. Her account was suspended. But she was talking about her Jewish upbringing and also how Biden was making Jews the face of this century's genocide and how damaging that is to Jews. And I thought, I think a lot of Jews are very aware of that, but that's a compelling argument also for Jews to wake up, Mr. Seinfeld.
Yeah, and I forget what country she was for, but the last big public resignation came from an ambassador, and she resigned after getting basically demoted, moved, because she refused to come out in public and say that any of these policies are to make people safer, because she knew none of this is making anyone safer in this situation.
No, it's not. I mean, we're basically like inviting World War III. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there are a lot of Jewish people who are very aware and feel probably on some level more free to talk about the comparisons to what's happening now to the Holocaust. Even, I mean, I think it was either Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein who first talked about Gaza not as an open air prison, but as an open air concentration camp. And the distinction, which I think is really important, is that a prison, in many people's minds, they hear prison and there's a connotation of the people here must have done something to deserve to be here. They're guilty in some way.
Right.
So in that way, it's not an accurate term, right?
That's true. And I mean, we now know there are actual literal concentration camps with Gazans where they're being tortured.
That's right.
So,
and that's because of 2 IDF soldier whistleblowers. So that's how, I mean, you know, they came forward to say they're being tortured. They're not allowed to sleep. They have amputations from their arms being tied so tightly behind their backs. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so this week, another big story was, you know, all the Zionists and propagandists for Israel on American television are claiming, oh, that's an undercount. The UN has recognized that this death toll is a huge undercount, you know.
They halved the number of women and children they say were slaughtered. Hamas lied.
Right.
That's what they're trying to say.
And just like the beheaded babies, that story never gets, you know, there's no fact checking.
Lives forever.
It just exists.
Mass rape.
Yeah, mass rape, kids in fire in ovens, you know, all that stuff there's not a drop of evidence of it. And this myth that these numbers are actually so wrong that the UN cut it in half. No, obviously what they did was they said, you know, we're revising our numbers on how many are confirmed dead by name, but we know these numbers are accurate.
Right. So just to show, so this is what happened. This was May 6th. Reported casualties were 34,735. 2 days later, they go up almost 100. Okay. But underneath that, in the black, it says 24,686. I mean, the writing, we need slightly more legible writing in these graphics. Identified as of the 30th of April. And so when they were able to, I mean, remember, there are tens of thousands of bodies still buried under rubble. There are people, because these bombs are so enormous, people who are in sections. I mean, we've all seen these horrifying images of parents or children picking up pieces of their family members who were just blown up in front of them and putting them in plastic bags or in their kids' backpacks. So
yeah, this whole thing is about identified bodies by name. That's all it is. It's not, these are the totals. This was just revised this week. They put these out every 2 or 3 weeks, but 43, I mean, forget the people killed. 141 journalists, 332 healthcare facilities. This is why it's a genocide. Like, forget the first number, look at the rest of it. You don't destroy a whole civilization like that.
The infrastructure of everything, all their universities, museums, hospitals, schools,
history, schools, museums, but
wiping
hospitals.
Out, yeah.
Like, why do you wipe out every hospital? You know?
Well, you wipe out the hospitals and you wipe out the record of them ever existing and anything they've ever put forth in a creative way, right? So that's all been decimated.
And we're now in Trail of Tears territory where Gazans are asked to leave Rafah with nowhere to go, and they're starving to death, and they have to march for miles to get to another tent somewhere else where you don't have food, farther away from the crossing where the aid is, where the aid isn't, actually, I should say.
Right.
But I did, there's one, I didn't pull a clip for it or anything, but there is a militia from Egypt getting aid across the border on their own. So there's something good in that level. I mean, it's not enough for people, but I mean, you know, when you've got Egyptian militias going, holy shit, this is just disgusting, we can't do it, and they're finding a way.
Yeah, which will be more death and blood, because I mean, it is such a strange thing for them to talk about needing to feed Gazans.
Sorry, I'll share that infographic.
Needing to feed Gazans and give them humanitarian aid while supplying the same people who are denying that aid with the bombs that are killing them and forcing them to need that aid. I mean, it's just so sick. It is just vile. But so that was taken, those revised numbers were immediately seized on by the worst people in the world, like, Joe Scarborough, who still, this is what are we on, the 15th? 3 days ago, he wrote this nonsense, which was refuted right away. UN halves the estimates of women and children killed in Gaza. Apparently, the Hamas figures repeatedly cited are false. That was a lie. This tweet is still up today, 3 days later.
Journalist
On MSNBC. This is one of his, what's his name, Biden's 2 favorite things to watch is Scarborough. And then there's one other thing that now I can't remember, but I know that Scarborough is like, you know, the way Trump listens to Fox. I don't know why this guy is not rotting in a jail somewhere, but this is written by Elliot Abrams, war criminal extraordinaire at the Council of Foreign Relations. Fox, you're in great company.
It's just such
with Fox.
Intentional, obvious,
lie.
False lie. Yeah, it's a lie.
To make it seem like you can't trust Hamas's numbers, which is what Biden has done from day one and been corrected from day one. The UN and US State Department officials have said, no, those we use and rely on those Gazan Hamas, you know, the Hamas stated numbers. We have been relying on them and they are accurate for years. Oh, look at this. Call yourself honest reporting. Oops. Oh, wait. This is what they said, but then this is a reminder. Media ignore quietly revised UN figures of Hamas reported civilian deaths. Lie. But then they're just as a reminder, these are the same people who said that a lot of Palestinian journalists were actually Hamas or had helped with the invasion on October 7th, which is another way of just putting a target on anybody who has a big vest with press on it. But so then one of the spokespeople at the UN came out and explained 3 days ago that no, we didn't revise our numbers. It's just that we were finally able actually to identify this number of people. We're continuing to do our work, but no, the deaths are climbing every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to also remind people that, you know, a very well-respected leftist, Ralph Nader, thinks that the death toll is over 200,000 at this point.
I mean, I don't know how it couldn't be with the way they've just been with these, non-precise, what do they call them? Non-smart bombs, imprecise bombs.
And, you know, with no cell service, no infrastructure, how do you possibly keep track of all these people that are starving to death with nobody? Yeah. There's not a list of like, how are you doing? Is Pat Cody still alive?
Well, which is one of the reasons that they destroyed all the infrastructure is because, and the journalists, how do you report on it? How do you look at the registries? Whom do you go to say I'm missing my child? And then, and that's something that makes the building of the pier out of the rubble by the, Jose Andreas people.
Yeah.
So vile because people's bodies were within there. So those are people who will never be identified. There was a really great interview, and then I think we'll probably be moving off of Israel, but a great interview I thought with Piers Morgan and Rania Khalek from Breakthrough News. Once again, asking her that question, do you condemn Hamas? And this is how she dealt with Piers Morgan.
100 journalism professors at elite universities across the country are asking the New York Times to review their investigative reporting on October 7th. A lot of what we heard are lies. You don't talk about that on the show. Israeli media has reported on a lot of those lies too. Moreover, Piers, if you're going to say what Israel's doing is a response to October 7th, then could October 7th perhaps have been a response to what Israel's been doing to Palestinians, which nobody was covering on October 4th or October 5th or October 6th? What I hear here is no empathy for people undergoing a genocide. And I'm sitting here and you're asking me to condemn people who are fighting for their survival. I don't condemn Palestinian armed resistance groups, just like I wouldn't condemn slaves shooting at their plantation masters. Apparently, a lot of you would. I wouldn't condemn Nat Turner's rebellion. I wouldn't condemn Geronimo. I wouldn't condemn the Irish fighting the British.
Yeah, Pat took off. He was so impressed. She did. She called them out on their shit, and there he goes. Nice. That question, I mean, it is such a deflection, and they do it every time. Just the way they just keep talking about October 7th, which, yes, was horrible, but they don't talk about all the days, years leading up to that. And they don't talk about all the days since then. Like, even if history started on October 7th, every day since then has been infinitely worse. And they only talk about the Israeli hostages, never about the Palestinian hostages.
Yeah. And Pierce has been so god awful this entire time.
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting called out more and more on his own show. Yeah. And he even pushed back against one of his guests recently.
Did. Yeah. An Israeli spokesperson about the number of civilians.
But will it wake them up? No, he's got an agenda. He clearly, but Rania crushed him there. Kudos for that.
Yeah,
that's how you have to stand up to people. She has a great show. I watch it once in a while.
Yeah.
Very
I love
good.
It.
What is it? I forget.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's not the Empire Files. That's Abby Martin.
Somebody help me put it in the chat.
Breakthrough News. Anybody? All right. Breakthrough News is their whole
Breakthrough News. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I said that at the beginning. Had you already left? Did you already check out when I said from Breakthrough News? It's okay.
Probably.
It's okay. I'll give you the Cliff Notes after.